My name is Ruby. I am 35 years old and I currently live and work in Tampa, Florida. My whole life I was used to being behind the scenes cooking, cleaning, quietly carrying the load so others could shine, but I never imagined a moment that could bring a three-story mansion to a sudden, suffocating silence. On Christmas night, with the piano playing softly and the tree lights twinkling in the foyer, I was carrying a platter of roasted ribs to the table when my father's voice rang out, full of pride. Thank my son Ethan for keeping our family traditions alive all these years. I froze. Those ribs took me 8 hours to prepare. I had planned the menu, shopped, and cooked each dish from early morning. Yet, once again, all that work was being handed to Ethan, who had just arrived that morning empty-handed, wearing a perfect smile and a flashy investment story. The applause landed like knives, and my hands let go of the glass serving tray. The sound of shattering on the marble floor silenced everyone. I no longer wanted to pretend. Have you ever been treated like the help in your own family home? If you've felt that way, leave a comment below. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and share this story if you want to join me on the journey to reclaim my worth. Because after that night, I uncovered a secret, one that changed everything in this family forever. The glass tray hitting the cold stone floor sounded like the last blow to my faith. Shards flew everywhere. A few drops of rib sauce splattered onto the wine-colored velvet dress. I had carefully chosen to fit the Christmas mood without outshining the guests. My eyes were fixed on my father's face as he clinked glasses with his businessman friends and went on praising Ethan's natural leadership, as if I hadn't been in this kitchen for 3 days, as if I hadn't been the one getting up at 5 a.m. to prepare every dish on the table that made people sigh with pleasure. No one ran to me when the tray fell. No one asked if I was hurt. Not a single worried glance, not one let her rest a moment. They merely frowned that the party was interrupted, then resumed pouring wine as if the crash were a minor technical hiccup. I bent down to pick up the shards, my hands shaking under the chandelier's glitter, not from fear, out of anger. It felt like all the years I spent quietly trying to be useful had been gathered into the pitying looks of people who couldn't even remember my name. "Ruby," my mother whispered, stepping quickly toward me but not bending down. She tilted her head and spoke softly as if I were a child shaming the grown-ups at their party. "Could you go back to the kitchen for a bit? Don't spoil the mood." I looked up at her. My voice sounded strangely cold. "Do you know how many dishes I made for this meal?" She blinked, as if she didn't understand why I was asking. "You always do so well, Ruby. No one makes stuffing like you. But tonight is a special occasion. Lots of guests don't make a fuss." "A special occasion? To honor Ethan?" I smiled, a smile I barely recognized. "You think I'm here just to cook and fade into the background, like every year?" "Ruby," my mother called, but her voice dropped as she noticed a few guests starting to glance our way. I stood up, left the broken glass and my patience behind. "I'm not going back to the kitchen. If Ethan is the one keeping the family traditions, then let him finish serving the meal." I turned my back and walked out of the banquet hall amid dozens of stunned faces. The kitchen, spacious, gleaming, fragrant, suddenly felt like a holding cell. I sat on a wooden stool by the bar, the pressure from my shoulders to my spine like a tight band. I had never reacted like that in front of them, but I had never been wounded so deeply. My mother's iPad sat on the counter with the screen still on. Instinct made me swipe through. A Facebook page was open. A new post stopped me cold. A photo of Ethan beaming, holding a glass of wine, with the caption, "So proud of my son, he keeps our family spirit alive at every celebration." Tonight's menu was Ethan's suggestion. Thanks to him for always making everyone feel at home. I gripped the stool. I was the one who had planned the menu, cooked every dish, tasted each one. That post felt like a slap. Not because I wasn't mentioned, but because it condensed all the pain I had swallowed for 35 years, always there but never seen. I scrolled through older posts. Last Thanksgiving, Ethan was tagged in 5 photos. I appeared in a tiny corner bending to carry a tray of roast chicken. The previous Christmas was the same. I was always busy somewhere, never in a photo, sitting down, laughing, or simply resting. I wasn't asked to take the family picture. I was placed where a serving hand would be. A soft knock. Aunt Margaret slid into the kitchen doorway, her face framed by the light, her eyes looking straight at my soul. "Are you all right, Ruby?" I shook my head, a tightness in my throat. "Just a little tired. Maybe I'm used to it." She came closer and put a hand on my shoulder. They might not see you, but I do. I let out a bitter laugh. That sounds like something from a movie. No, Ruby, she said slowly. I've seen this for a long time. When a friend's daughter had to drop out of school because her family forced her to do housework, I learned that some girls are always treated like tools. I see it happening to you, and you don't deserve it. I squeezed her hand. Then why doesn't anyone in the house speak up? Because they need you in that old role. There, you don't disrupt the order that makes them comfortable. I looked into her eyes. So what should I do? Yell in the middle of the party? Or go silent and leave tomorrow morning? Aunt Margaret sat beside me, her gaze grave. Or you start asking why you have to bear it, why your labor is invisible. And if the answers hurt, you have every right to change things. Silence settled, but her question uprooted something that had lain under the dust of my heart for years. Then she said, like dropping a coin that makes a hollow sound across my swelling emotions, Ruby, I happened to see a contract in your father's office when I went to fetch a coat. I thought you should know. I turned to her. What contract? The transfer of ownership for the old lakeside house in Georgia, your grandfather's estate. I remember when you graduated college, he said that place would be for both of you. But the papers now bear only Ethan's name. I stood up. My limbs went cold. The kitchen pitched as if it might collapse. Not because of the food, not because of my father's toast, but because it turned out I had been cut out of everything: the inheritance, the recognition, the trust. Aunt Margaret watched me, saying nothing. I leaned on the stone counter and felt a tremor run down my spine. I wanted to scream. I wanted to storm up to my father's study and confront him. But I also knew if I did that now, they would call me oversensitive, too loud, in the wrong mood. I took a deep breath and walked out of the kitchen. I didn't return to serve. I returned to face the truth someone had been hiding. I stood at the end of the hallway where the crystal lights cast bright streaks across the stone floor. The sound of the party still flowed, glasses clinking, Ethan telling his investor story, my mother laughing a little too much with a familiar guest. It all blended into a smooth noise that left no room for me. I didn't go in at once. Back against the wall, my heart coiled like a wet rope being twisted. I didn't need to look to know Ethan was still the center of attention. I was, as always, on the fringe of the light. I remembered my 8th birthday. It was supposed to be the first time I had enough friends over to feel like a real party. My mother promised to bake the cake with me. I could still smell the vanilla batter, see the pink paper party hat I picked up at Dollar Tree, and the puffy sleeved sweater dress I'd been so excited to wear. But 3 hours before guests arrived, my mother slipped into my room, face contrite, and said the party had to be canceled because Ethan had just won the district tennis championship and the family would go celebrate. I took the hat off, sat on the bed, and listened to the phones as invitations were canceled. No one asked if I was hurt. I folded my feelings in like a tablecloth and tucked them away in a drawer never opened. In college, I worked 3 jobs so I wouldn't be dependent on my parents. I didn't have much time, but I called home, sent holiday cards. I received letters from Ethan about his study abroad and my mother's praise. See, Ethan keeps up his grades even far away. What a son. As for me, who asked about my grades? The day I was promoted to lead designer at a major Orlando firm, I printed invitations and mailed them to my family. That morning, my mother texted that they couldn't attend because Ethan had an honors ceremony at City Hall for a neighborhood revitalization project. I stood alone in the auditorium, accepted my certificate to applause from strangers, and quietly left the reception I had planned for 6. I used to think if I kept trying gentle, compliant, doing my part, someday my family would finally see me. But the years pushed me deeper into a role that had been cast for me, the girl who cooks, who organizes, who avoids the spotlight when needed. Holiday after holiday, I was the talented cook. Ethan was the pride of the family. I never had my old room at my parents' house after Ethan moved out. My childhood room became a storage space, then a wine room. Ethan's room stayed pristine, bed made up, a high school photo hung prominently. I remember a winter night after a fight with an ex. I came home hoping to stay a few nights with my parents. My mother said, "We can add a sofa in the living room if you really need it." Ethan's room, well, it's about memories. I don't want to touch it. I said nothing. I smiled, said thank you, and slept on the sofa wrapped in my winter coat. As I grew older, I understood I was not born to be the family center. I never expected that distance would be formalized with paperwork, a transfer agreement bearing only Ethan's name, as Aunt Margaret had told me. I stepped into the banquet room where Ethan's voice rolled on. And if things go well, in 6 months the lakeside property will increase in value by 50%. We're negotiating with a sustainable tourism developer. I stood behind a pillar, close enough to see the thrill on my mother's face as she watched Ethan speak. People laughed, nodded, and murmured approval. My father poured another glass for himself. In their eyes, Ethan was the ideal model, handsome, polished, confident, visionary. I glanced at the buffet. The dishes I'd prepared remained nearly untouched. No one mentioned who had prepared them. No one mentioned me. I was background, like a dim light on a stage they didn't want anyone to focus on. I didn't confront them. I took a photo with my phone, my brother, the relatives, sparkling glasses, laughter, and then walked out to the backyard where snow began to fall lightly on the wooden bench my father had built when I was small. I sat down, took a deep breath, letting the cold creep into my fingers. The memories stopped hurting like a burn, they became data. Looking at my life as a string of analyzable facts, I realized what I lacked was not love, but recognition. I had thought love meant being cared for, being present behind the scenes. But perhaps I deserved to be in the frame. Maybe I didn't need to prove my worth with a perfect roast or a table set down to the last napkin. Maybe I deserved to be heard not because I could speak softly, but because I was right. The wind through the pines made me shiver. I adjusted the scarf slipping off my shoulder and heard Aunt Margaret's voice behind me. "Do you want the details about that paper?" I didn't turn, I only nodded. I knew that if I stepped into that story, I would no longer be the quiet Ruby in the kitchen. I would be someone redefining her role in this family with memory, with reason, and with the truth. Aunt Margaret led me to the back porch where the kitchen's weak yellow light could no longer cut through the misted glass. I wasn't wearing a coat, but the cold didn't make me shiver. Inside me, a different kind of quiet was spreading, the kind that only comes when a woman has endured too long and suddenly has nothing left to lose. She sat beside me and took a folded sheet from her purse. Under the dim light, I saw the heading in bold. Private Property Transfer Agreement, stamped and notarized in the corner. I opened it slowly. It was a copy of the transfer for the old wooden house in Georgia, the place I spent summers with my grandfather. That house was a mosaic of memories. The old pear tree on the porch, the hammock he strung between two pines, the smell of old wood and apple pie when my grandmother was alive. That house was a symbol for our family. In my grandfather's words, that house will be for both of you. Daughter or son, both will have a share. But on the document in my hand was only one name, Ethan J. Carrington, not mine. There is no note of joint ownership, no mention of a temporary trust. It only bears Ethan's name and the permanent transfer clause signed by my father, Harold Carrington, on October 12th, less than 2 months ago. I stared at the line as if it might change itself, but the ink remained clear, sharp as a knife cutting open the truth. Aunt Margaret found it among the papers left out on his desk. When she went to get a coat, she said softly, "Your father probably assumed everyone was busy with the party and wouldn't notice." I took a photo with my phone, then printed this copy. I asked in a low voice, "Did you see my mother's signature?" "No," she shook her head. "Only Harold's, and his lawyer's." "But what matters, Ruby, is this. That estate, according to your grandfather's wishes, was supposed to be divided equally. At least that was what the draft he showed me in his final weeks said." I folded the sheet and set it on my lap. Dad quietly cut me out of the plan. Aunt Margaret did not answer. She knew that statement needed no confirmation. I thought of the times I called home asking about the house in Georgia. My mother said they had no concrete plans yet, that they were considering the future. I had naively assumed considering the future meant waiting until I was more settled and could visit more often. Now I realized that future had never included me. I stood and walked through the kitchen into the house. It was still warm. Christmas music drifted softly, and the scent of freshly baked cinnamon hung in the air. I went straight upstairs to my father's private study, separated from the common rooms. The mahogany door stood ajar. I pushed it open gently. The room was neat. A tall bookcase reached the ceiling on one side, a locked filing cabinet on the other. But on the desk, something was exposed. The printer was still on, the power light blinking, and a thick stack of documents sat askew. I pulled out the swivel chair and Saturday, The papers were a jumble, mostly financial letters, property valuation reports, and an investment contract for a vineyard in Napa Valley. I paused when I saw the familiar title, Carrington Heritage Vineyard Investment Agreement, the investment contract for a winery bearing the family name. I turned to the first page. The listed investment representative, Ethan J. Carrington. The official financial sponsors, Harold and Elise Carrington. There was no mention of Ruby Carrington anywhere, no invitation to collaborate, no recognition of contributions or rights. The final page outlined profit sharing and ownership. Ethan would hold 100% of operating control. If my parents died, all shares would transfer to Ethan permanently. I pulled each page from the file, like removing layers of deceit that had been draped over my faith. I had thought I was overlooked because I didn't measure up to Ethan. Now I understood. I had been excluded from the start. I reached up and touched the framed family photo on the desk. It was from a winter 3 years ago. Ethan stood in the center, his arm around my mother. My father stood to the right. I stood well back to one side, a half-visible face. I remembered that night. I drove 8 hours straight, ferrying the whole family to Georgia. I cooked 3 meals in that cold kitchen, and I was scolded by my mother for not changing into the red dress for the photo. My father's voice behind me made me jump. "What are you doing in my study?" I stood, clutching the folder, and faced him. "I'm reading what should have been disclosed long ago." He furrowed his brow, his expression tight. "That is private documentation. No one has the right. A family asset that bears only one signature is no longer private." He came into the room and closed the door behind him. His tone was lower, and any gentleness had gone. "Ethan is the suitable one. He has a business mind, connections. You always avoid major responsibilities. You chose a creative career, living independently, not wanting to be tied down." I smiled, but there was no softness in it. Choosing not to be tied down does not mean being unqualified to share the estate equally. It does not justify erasing my name from everything that belongs to this family. My father was silent. I went on. "I used to think, if I kept doing the right thing, if I kept contributing without asking, one day people would notice. But it turns out I was excluded from meetings, plans, and divisions from the start." I set the documents on the desk and did not take my eyes off him. "And if this is the family's decision, then I have the right to respond. I will not be silent any longer." The air in the room felt heavy as stone. My father looked at me as if weighing whether to explain. He sighed and finally said, "Ruby, it's not as simple as you think." I nodded. "I understand. We will make it clearer." I turned and walked out. My chest did not feel lighter, but something within me had shifted, like an old, stiff door finally pushed open by a strong gust. I left my father's study and walked slowly along the deep brown carpeted hallway, the wall sconces casting long shadows at my feet like invisible cords holding me in place. My father's words echoed in my head. "You're not suitable. You live independently. You don't want to be tied down." Those words were like scissors cutting the last threads that connected me to whatever the family had called family. When I returned to the kitchen, Aunt Margaret was still waiting in silence. She had brewed another cup of peppermint tea. The aroma was gentle, as if she were trying to soothe a storm we both knew would not calm quickly. I put the file on the small corner dining table and sat across from her. "I found everything," I said softly. She nodded, her eyes carrying a tiredness mixed with an ancient sorrow. "I figured you would," she replied. "You're not the sort to back away when something's unclear." Thoughts swirled through me. "You said Grandpa had a different will?" Aunt Margaret was quiet for a few seconds, as if gathering buried memories, then nodded, slowly and deliberately. "Yes. A few weeks before he died, he called me to his home in Georgia. He was frail then, but his mind was sharp. He sat at the wooden porch table with a stack of papers in front of him. His hand trembled, but his handwriting was still clear." I swallowed hard. "He showed me a draft of his will. It stated clearly that the Georgia house, along with his remaining investment in the vineyard, would be divided equally between Ethan and you." I looked at her gentle face, trying to understand why that had not happened. "So, what changed?" She exhaled, squeezing her teacup. "He said he would leave the rest to his private attorney to handle, and that he didn't want to announce anything until everything was finalized. He only asked me to witness that he intended it that way." A week later, he was hospitalized and passed soon after. My throat went dry. And the official will appeared a few days after the funeral. That one bore only Ethan's name. The kitchen felt so quiet I could hear the wind through the crack under the door. I clenched my fist. Do you suspect anyone? Aunt Margaret looked up at me, without hesitation now. Your father was the one working directly with the lawyer while your grandfather was in the hospital. Your mother was always at his side, handling paperwork. When I asked about the will your grandfather had mentioned, your mother told me it was only an unsigned draft, with no legal standing. But he told you clearly, very clearly. He emphasized you and Ethan should be treated fairly, even if you chose different paths in life. He loved Ethan, but he understood you worked just as hard. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the empty space beyond Aunt Margaret's shoulder. A blend of emotions, both fresh and long smoldering, rose anger mingled with the slow forming of something that had been smoldering for years. I asked slowly, in a steady voice, "Did you keep that draft?" She shook her head regretfully. "I didn't keep the hard copy, but he did email me a scanned PDF. I still have it." I practically jumped up. "Can you send it to me now?" "Of course. I never deleted it. I only waited until you were ready to look at it." I leaned across the table, took her hand, my eyes dry but my chest breaking like waves against a rocky shore. "Thank you. I have been too silent. I think I need to make things clear." She nodded, eyes full of support. "Yes. Because if you don't do it, they will keep rewriting the story the way they want. And you'll always be sidelined." I sat in silence for a moment, feeling as if I were seated between two worlds, one of glossy packages, parties, and hollow toasts. The other, the memory of a child cutting a birthday cake alone because the celebration was canceled for a brother's achievement. My phone buzzed. Aunt Margaret had forwarded the email. I opened it. As she said, the attachment was a draft will with a clear date and my grandfather's handwritten note at the end, scanned cleanly. "I want both of my grandchildren to inherit what I leave. My daughter Ruby is the quietest in this family, but she keeps the true value of kinship alive. Do not let fairness become something that must be demanded." I put the phone down, feeling something split open and flood out a pain that was also clarity. I was not the only one who had seen the injustice. My grandfather, the reticent, stern man who never forgot my birthday, had seen me. He had written it down. I stood and gripped my phone. Perhaps they had altered the papers. Perhaps they expected me to remain silent as in years past. But that was over. I had evidence, a witness, and above all, I was no longer afraid to lose anyone. Aunt Margaret rose and touched my shoulder lightly. "You are not alone, Ruby." I looked at her. Her gentle eyes made my chest ache. Not from sorrow, but because I had recognized the simplest truth. When someone truly sees you, you no longer have to beg for a place in someone else's heart. I walked down the hallway toward the living room, my steps unusually decisive. The house still smelled of cinnamon and smoked meats, and laughter drifted from the main room as if nothing that had just happened ever existed. But I was no longer willing to bow my head and slip away into the dark corner behind the kitchen. My mother sat in an armchair opposite the fireplace, her dark silk dress catching the warm lamplight. She held a glass of red wine and was smiling at someone in the circle of guests. When she saw me, her smile froze halfway. A brief hesitation crossed her face. I didn't wait for her to call me. I walked straight up, stopped in front of her, and kept my voice even. "We need to talk." She glanced quickly at the people around, then stood, smoothed her shoulder, and whispered, "In the hall. This isn't the place." I followed her through the door into the study, the quiet room my grandfather used to claim for himself. The scent of old wood lingered, mixed with a hint of lavender my mother sprayed on the curtains. She closed the door, turned to face me, and said in a low, measured voice, "What do you want now, Ruby?" I looked her in the eye. "I want to know why I was removed from all the family plans. The house in Georgia, the vineyard, the investment, and the so-called Carrington legacy, you and Dad always present as a gift to Ethan." She blinked and tilted her head, her tone cool. "Because Ethan is the only one who has preserved this family's honor. He has direction. He has managerial ability. He knows how to make connections. You only know how to cook and avoid responsibility." That remark landed like a heavy stone. I smiled lightly, though inside it felt like a spark had caught fire. "So all those years I organized Thanksgiving, cooking dozens of dishes, preparing Christmas from early December, cleaning up after everyone fell asleep, those weren't responsibilities to you? My mother folded her arms. That was voluntary. You chose to live that way. No one asked if I wanted a different choice, I replied, my voice steady though each word weighed like lead. At every important occasion, I was quietly assigned tasks as if I were the serving staff. Ethan gets the toasts and the congratulations. Her eyes flashed with defensiveness. Ethan never forced you to do any of it. But you did. I held back the rush of emotion. You always arranged things, handed out tasks, praised how handy I was, then turned to compliment Ethan's leadership qualities. You never said I have value too. She took a step forward, sharper now. Because you're not like him. You live apart. You never think about family. When support is needed, you always find an excuse that you're busy. You don't proactively build anything. You don't show you want to participate. Or, I lifted my chin, my eyes steady. Everything has been cast in roles for a long time, and when I step out of that role, you feel threatened? She froze. For a moment, I saw uncertainty in her eyes. Then she turned away toward the window. Outside, snow had begun to fall. I moved closer and spoke quietly. I have a copy of the will my grandfather wrote. He clearly stated the estate was to be divided equally between me and Ethan. He believed I had worth, even if I'm not loud. She spun back toward me. That document has no legal standing. It was only a draft. But it was his intention, I enunciated. And you know that. Her face paled, but her voice stayed sharp. That's been settled. Your father followed the legal process properly. If you want to sue, go ahead. But don't parade your emotions around and place blame. I nodded, as if confirming something I already understood. I don't need emotion to prove the truth. But I need you to answer clearly. Did you know about the will being changed? A long silence stretched between us. She gripped her wine glass tighter. When she spoke, her voice dropped. Your father did what was necessary to keep things under control. He didn't want to leave a burden to someone who wasn't ready. I let out a small laugh, a laugh that hurt. So, I'm not ready to inherit, yet I'm expected to cook, serve, and clean. You call that honor? She said nothing. I turned to leave, and her voice followed me, low but fierce. If you can't accept your place, then don't come back here. I stopped. My hand closed around the cold brass doorknob. Part of me wanted to turn and ask, do you really mean that? But I didn't. I had spent too long guessing other people's minds. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. People were still clinking glasses, music still played, the chandelier still shone. No one noticed me leave the house alone in the cold night. I grabbed my coat and hurried down the snow-covered steps. My footprints marked the white ground as I headed toward the car parked on the street. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't in pain, but because I was leaving by my own feet, not silently, not in submission. Only the wind moved between the trees, sharp and clean. I got in the driver's seat and shut the door. My breath fogged the windshield in thin clouds. Behind me, the mansion glittered like a stage set. I was no longer a supporting player. I was walking away from that play, carrying a truth they didn't want anyone to see. I drove off the snowy road, leaving the pale porch light of my parents' home behind. My heart felt heavy, but my grip on the wheel was firmer than it had been in years. I had nowhere to go that night but my small Orlando apartment. For years, I had put my career on hold to meet my family's endless expectations, but I refused to repeat that pattern. The car crossed the long bridge over the bay, streetlights reflecting on the cold water. My mother's words echoed, "You only know how to cook." That sentence pricked at the center of me. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. They had defined me by that role for far too long. If I didn't break out, my life would revolve around their kitchen forever, without a space to breathe. The next morning, I went to the design firm where I had freelanced years earlier before family demands pulled me away. The polished wood floors and light streaming through large windows felt like an invitation. Old colleagues looked surprised to see me back. The project director, Daniel Morris, studied me for a beat and then gave a warm smile. "Ruby, I didn't expect you back so soon. We could use someone like you," he said. I inclined my head, a little surprised by the welcome. "You need me?" He handed me a thick portfolio. The firm just won a major contract. Interior design for a 5-star resort on the Naples beachfront. "We've followed your old portfolio. No one doubts your creative talent. The issue is time." We need someone fully committed for the next 6 months. I opened the portfolio, initial sketches spread out. My heart picked up pace. Each line, each idea sparked within me. I hadn't felt this awakened by work in a long time. You want me to lead it? I asked, my voice calm but excited inside. Yes, a $3 million contract. You would oversee it all. We believe you can do it. I inhaled deeply, pressure and exhilaration washing through me. I accept. From that moment, I threw myself into the work. I arrived at the office early every day, scouted the beach site, drew concepts, and met with the design team. I had no time for my mother's cutting words. Focusing my whole energy revealed that the creative reserve I once poured into family dinners could become an endless source for my career. 3 months passed and the project took shape. I traveled back and forth between Orlando and Naples, meeting contractors, choosing every detail from the floorboards to curtain hues. The lead architects praised my ability to blend modern lines with coastal nature. Meanwhile, Ethan's troubles began appearing in the business pages. The real estate venture he'd invested in stalled over permitting issues. The images of him in tailored suits, always pictured with prominent investors, were replaced by headlines about risk and default. One late evening, while I was reviewing a 3D rendering for the resort's conference center, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number read, "Ruby, it's me. I need to talk." My chest tightened. It was Ethan. I didn't reply. I set the phone down and let it ring a few more times before it stopped. For years, I'd been there whenever he needed me, helping edit presentations in college, driving him to meetings when he was drunk. But tonight, I didn't want to be the person who always cleaned up his messes. A few days later, at the resort site, Daniel handed me the official signed contract envelope. He patted my shoulder. "Ruby, this project will launch your name to another level. No one will ever say you only cook again." I smiled. His remark, unintended, contradicted my mother's cruel words. I didn't need her to change to prove my worth. I would prove it with results. That evening, in my small apartment, city lights glimmered against the windows and the scent of jasmine tea filled the room. I opened my laptop and looked at the firm's financial projections. The expected profits after the resort's completion left me quiet for a few moments. $3 million was more than a contract. It was a milestone toward the independence I had longed for. That same night, Aunt Margaret called. Her voice was low but clear. "Ruby, have you heard about Ethan? He's trying to find funds, but no one wants to partner. Your parents are worried. I think they may come to you." I stared out at the lit skyline, feeling less abandoned and more clear-headed. While I walked forward on my own 2 feet, they stayed trapped in their old cycles. The balance was shifting. I sipped my tea and let the fragrance settle over the quiet. I didn't need anyone's approval to move forward. I was steadier than ever. One March afternoon, under soft Orlando sunlight, my phone rang again from Aunt Margaret. Her voice was urgent but composed. "Ruby, I found what you need. Can you come over tonight?" I paused my pen above the resort drawings, a ripple of anxiety and anticipation running through me. I had suspected she had something, but her certainty surprised me. Her small wooden house in the tree-lined suburbs glowed with warm light when I arrived. She sat at the kitchen table with a thick envelope neatly clipped. She motioned for me to sit and pushed the envelope toward me. "This is your grandfather's original will," she said. "It's stamped and witnessed. I kept it for years because I feared the day you might need it." My hands shook as I opened the envelope. The pages were slightly yellowed, but the handwriting and seals were clear. Each line stated plainly that the Georgia house and the remainder of his shares in the vineyard were to be divided equally between Ethan and Ruby Carrington. At the bottom, beside my grandfather's signature, a bright red notarization stamp and 2 witness signatures made the document indisputable. I took a deep breath to steady myself. For years, they'd dismissed me as irresponsible or unsuitable. But here on crisp paper, my grandfather had written that I had equal rights. "Where did you get this?" I asked softly. "After he died, his private lawyer sent a copy to me in case anything happened. I stayed quiet because I assumed your father would do the right thing." But the more I watched, the more it seemed strange. I clutched the stack like the only lifeline out of a well of doubt. "Do you think they hid it on purpose?" Her gaze was steady. "Not think, Ruby. I'm certain. You were removed from the plan not by accident, but because they wanted Ethan to inherit everything alone." A chill ran down my spine despite the warm kitchen. I thought of the photos, me on the edge, doing the work, never in the center, and realized the truth. They had conspired to make me an outsider in my own family. I sat quietly for a long while, then said slowly, "So, I wasn't imagining it. All the injustices I felt have roots." Aunt Margaret put a hand on my shoulder, her voice warm but steady. "Right. And now you have proof in your hands. You can choose to stay silent and keep living as before, or you can use it to make a change." I looked at the will. Each word seemed to shine in my eyes. This was not just a stack of paper. It was evidence that I was not invisible, that my grandfather had seen me, trusted me, and intended to leave me an equal share of the estate alongside Ethan. In that moment, a strange strength rose inside me. I was no longer simply the woman my mother scolded as just good at cooking. I had rights, reasoning, and a witness. Aunt Margaret poured more tea, then asked softly, "Have you considered confronting them directly?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, but not now. I need to prepare. I need them to see I'm no longer someone who can be pushed aside." She smiled, a proud smile. "That's the Ruby Granddad always hoped for." That night, back at my apartment, I placed the will on my desk, right next to the resort sketches. Seeing them side by side, I recognized two parallel paths. One, the career I had built with my own sweat. The other, the family legacy that had been taken from me. Both attest to my worth, and I would hold on to both, refusing to let anyone erase them. A few days later, news about Ethan resurfaced in the papers. Investors began pulling out of his project after sustained losses. I read each line and felt no tremor of surprise. Ethan was still my brother, but what he and our parents had done could not be dismissed as mere pressure or mistake. I opened a drawer and looked at "No pressure," the will again. In the soft, late afternoon light, the paper felt like an unfulfilled promise. I whispered, as if my grandfather were somewhere in the room, "I will not let them erase my name anymore." I folded the copy, placed it into a large file folder, and labeled it with a bright red sticker. Evidence. I knew that soon I would need to put that folder in front of them. And when the time came, no one would be able to dodge the truth for another second. I spent weeks preparing. The resort work still took most of my time, but every evening when I returned to my apartment, I opened the red-labeled file, read each detail, and noted the points I needed to emphasize. I didn't rush to take legal action. I understood that before stepping onto the long, messy path of litigation, I needed a public, undeniable moment, one that left no room for denial. The invitation to the family's big event arrived faster than I expected. An elegant card was sent to my office with a handwritten note from my mother. "Ruby, please come. This is an important occasion for Ethan, and we need to look united." I smiled as I read it. They still assumed I would appear obediently, stand in a corner, smile, and serve as I had for years. But I had a different plan. That evening, the city's largest hotel was rented for the event. Soft music filled the wide ballroom, and suits and evening gowns glittered under the lights. My parents sat in the front row, and Ethan stood beside them in a silver gray suit, his face radiant. A giant LED screen was ready on stage for the project presentation. I entered with my hair neatly pinned, wearing a fitted black dress. I was no longer the woman bent over a stove. I was someone walking straight into the light, each step confident, my gaze steady. Ethan saw me, paused for a heartbeat, then offered a calculated smile. He came over and gave me a perfunctory hug in front of the investors. "You made it. Good family looks better when everyone's here." "Indeed," I replied quietly. "The more the merrier." As the program began, Ethan took the stage, his voice warm and practiced, every sentence polished to impress. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Carrington family not only preserves tradition but looks to the future. Tonight, I am honored to announce the project to expand our family heritage, a major step for the vineyard and the old Georgian house. With the right investment, we will turn the estate into a luxury destination, a new symbol for the region." Applause rose. My parents beamed, their eyes fixed on their son as if he were the center of the world. I waited for Ethan to finish his introduction and raise his hand to cue the promotional video. At that moment, I stood. My footsteps rang on the wooden floor, drawing heads. I did not rush. The determined calm in my movements gradually hushed the room. I walked straight onto the stage where Ethan held the microphone. He frowned and murmured, "What are you doing? This isn't your part." I took a USB drive from my bag and handed it to the technician nearby. Sorry, but there's something more important to show. All eyes turned to me. I took the mic, my voice clear and steady. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Ruby Carrington. For many years, you have known Ethan as the family's sole representative. The truth is different. Tonight, I want to present a document, the original will of my grandfather, stamped and notarized, signed and certified. The big screen behind us lit up. Each page of the will Aunt Margaret had given me displayed in full. Bold text declared that the Georgia house and the remainder of the vineyard shares were to be divided equally between the two grandchildren, Ethan and Ruby Carrington. A ripple of shocked murmurs swept the ballroom. Chairs scraped, conversations rose, astonished faces turned my way. I stood still and let people read every word. Ethan's color drained, his voice broke. This is just a draft. It has no legal standing. I cut him off sharply. If it's only a draft, why is it notarized? Why are there witness signatures? And why was I never informed while the entire estate was transferred to Ethan's name? Some investors began standing, whispering to each other. One silver-haired man in a navy suit rose and asked bluntly, "If what you say is true, doesn't that mean the property is subject to legal dispute? Then this expansion project has no secure basis." Chaos followed. People moved for the exits. Others started dialing phones. I heard an investor hiss, "You can't risk pouring money into something whose ownership isn't settled." Ethan stepped forward, gripping the microphone, his face flaming. "Ruby, you're sabotaging this." I looked him squarely in the eye. "Number. I'm reclaiming my voice, the one that has been buried beneath your false spotlight for years." My mother sprang up, her voice shaking with anger. "Ruby, how could you humiliate the family like this in front of so many people?" I replied, each word cutting the air, "I'm not humiliating the family. I refuse to be erased from it." The room fell into a stunned hush, with only scattered murmurs. My father hung his head, silent. He avoided meeting my gaze as if the truth were too heavy to face. One by one, the investors left, leaving Ethan on stage, trembling, his face hardened and lost. The smugness that usually played on his features vanished, replaced by awkward shame. I took a deep breath, set the microphone down, and didn't speak further. No words were necessary. The truth had been revealed. It could no longer be hidden behind closed doors. Under the glaring lights, I stepped down from the stage and walked past rows of astonished faces. No one stopped me. No one dared to treat me as Ethan's shadow any longer. The evidence had been exposed. The balance in the Carrington family would never be the same. After the hotel event, the story spread faster than anything I'd ever imagined. In one night, financial papers and local news ran the headline, "Carrington Family Estate Dispute." Photos of me on stage holding the will filled front pages. My name, someone who had been edited out of so many family images, now appeared in bold, Ruby Carrington, the hidden heir. 2 days later, my parents came to my Orlando apartment. When I opened the door, they stood there in heavy coats, exhausted faces. My mother clutched her familiar leather bag. My father was quiet, his eyes red from sleepless nights. "We need to talk," my mother said, her voice no longer sharp but urgent. I let them in, poured tea, but didn't sit beside them. I stood by the kitchen island to keep my distance. My father spoke first. "Ruby, you blew everything up. Investors left, the family's reputation is tarnished. What did you hope to achieve?" I looked at him straight on. "So people stop pretending I never existed." My mother leaned forward, her voice trembling. "You may be angry, you may have grievances, but humiliating the family publicly, do you understand the consequences? Ethan lost contracts, the family's standing is at risk. You are part of this family too, so you're affected." I set my cup down calmly but firmly. I've been affected for 35 years. Overlooked in every decision. Pushed into the kitchen like a servant. Lied out of the inheritance my grandfather intended for me. If that's called family, they never truly acknowledged me. My mother gripped my hand, her face flushed. "We can fix this. Give me the documents, let your father work with our lawyer. We'll handle it privately, no more public spectacle." I shook my head. "Number. If you want to keep contact with me, you must publicly acknowledge the mistake. The estate must be divided according to my grandfather's will. Most importantly, treat me from now on as a full member of the family, not a shadow while Ethan is everything." The room grew heavy. My father's tone dropped. "Are you really placing conditions on your own parents?" I answered simply, "Yes." Because until now, everyone imposed unspoken conditions on me: be quiet, obedient, accept exclusion. Now it's my turn. He turned away, rubbing his forehead, bewildered. My mother bit her lip, eyes mixed with anger and despair. Do you know how Ethan will react? My mother asked. He said he won't stand for it. He's threatening to sue you for defamation. I smiled faintly. He can try, but the evidence is on my side. The will is notarized. My grandfather's original email to Aunt Margaret still exists. Moreover, deliberately hiding documents to reap an entire estate could be considered fraud. I'm not afraid to go to court. My mother fell silent, her fingers digging into the edge of the chair. My father sighed, exhausted. Ruby, you don't understand. We've spent our lives building the Carrington name. If this drags on, everything will collapse. I stepped closer and looked squarely at them both. Reputation built on lies will crumble. I'm not the one destroying it. Deception Island. In the small room, the clock's ticking, sliced through the prolonged silence. My mother finally spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. So what do you want us to do? I answered clearly, publicly acknowledge the original will. Agree to an equitable division of the estate. And from now on, if we claim to be family, treat me like a child of this family, not the help. Otherwise, we have nothing left to discuss. My mother's gaze lingered on my face as if she no longer recognized the girl who had quietly done everything in the past. My father sank into a chair and covered his face with both hands. You have changed, he murmured. No, I said firmly. I've stopped enduring. Our meeting ended in heavy silence. They left without another word. I stood at the door and watched them disappear under the streetlights. A few days later, Ethan's lawyer sent a letter demanding I retract my disclosure and apologize publicly. I immediately handed everything to my attorney. Hours later, Ethan received a response. The legal evidence overwhelmingly favored me. The risk of him being countersued for asset fraud was far greater than his chances of winning. That evening, my phone rang from an unknown number. Ethan's voice was sharp. What more do you want? You ruined everything. My project collapsed. Investors fled. The press is digging. Do you think you won? I stayed calm. I don't want to win against you. I want fairness. Granddad left his estate to both of us, not only to you. If you acknowledge that, everything can end peacefully. He was silent for a few seconds, then snapped. Never. I will not share anything with you. The call cut off. I set the phone down and my hands no longer trembled the way they used to when he yelled at me. Because now I held the truth, and that truth was stronger than any anger. I turned back to my desk and opened the resort plans. The screen light played across my face. I let out a long breath, fully aware that the turbulence was far from over. But at least I was no longer the quiet woman in that old kitchen. I was the one in control of my own life. A year passed faster than I expected. Orlando in late December shone with lights. Streets were draped in twinkling strands. Shop windows displayed Christmas trees and deep red gift boxes. I stood in my roomy apartment, watching the reflections on the clear glass. This was no longer the little place I once had. It was the elegant space I bought for myself after signing the resort contract and taking on 2 more projects afterward. The living room felt warm in a different way. A Christmas tree nearly 10 feet tall stood in the corner, hung with shimmering silver baubles and red bows. The long dining table was set with a cream tablecloth. Candles flickered and filled the air with cinnamon and orange. I had spent days preparing, not out of obligation but with excitement. The doorbell rang. I opened it to find Aunt Margaret, wrapped in a thick sweater and holding a basket of gingerbread cookies. Her eyes lit up as she looked around the apartment. Ruby, you've really turned this place into a home, she said, voice both moved and proud. I hugged her tightly. I want everyone who walks in to feel welcomed, not like the parties I used to endure. Behind her came a group of friends. Jessica, a colleague from the design firm, carrying a bottle of wine. Thomas, a collaborating architect, laughing as he squeezed in with his wife and kids, and a few friendly neighbors from the building. They came in, voices and laughter spreading, blending with the smell of warm baked goods coming from the oven. The party started with a turkey I had prepared myself, but this time I wasn't standing alone in the kitchen. Jessica helped me with seasoning, Thomas arranged the table. The kids chattered as they hung more decorations. Everyone pitched in, no one treated the cooking as one person's burden. As everyone took their seats, I found myself thinking of old Christmases. The laughter in the living room back then never seemed meant for me. I heard it from a distance while I stirred sauce with a spoon. Now it was different. I sat in the center of the table, surrounded by people who truly appreciated me not for what I did, but for who I was. Just then, my phone vibrated. My father's number appeared on the screen. I paused, motioned for everyone to continue, and stepped out onto the balcony to take the call. His voice sounded older. "Ruby, I'm calling to wish you a Merry Christmas. Your mother and we want to apologize. We were wrong this past year. You don't have to answer now, but know that we regret it." I heard my mother's voice threaded in, small but clear. "I'm sorry too, Ruby. If you agree, we can meet not to argue, but to start again." I didn't rush to respond. I looked out over the bright city. The cold wind carried the faint salt of the distant sea. "Thank you for calling. I'll think about it. But I need time, and I need to see real change, not just words." My father was silent for a moment, then said softly, "I understand." The call ended, leaving me with a strange feeling, part relief, part the sense of an old wound beginning to heal. Ethan was completely absent. His name vanished from conversation and no longer appeared in glossy pieces about ambitious projects. I heard rumors that he'd sold much of his stake to cover debts and withdrawn from the public eye. I didn't feel gloating. I just saw clearly that what he had built could not stand on a foundation of lies. I returned to the table. Glasses were raised, candlelight reflected on smiling faces. I smiled and said with conviction, "This is the tradition I choose. Not parties full of dazzling lights, but empty of true affection, but moments where we genuinely cherish one another." A chorus of cheers rose and glasses clinked. Aunt Margaret placed a hand on my shoulder, her eyes shining with joy and pride. Jessica laughed and called out, "Ruby, let's do this again next year, but this time we'll run the kitchen. You get to sit down and eat." Everyone laughed, and sitting amid that circle, I felt one clear thing. I was not lonely anymore. I'd found a new family, not by blood, but by respect and genuine care. Outside the window, light snowflakes drifted and melted on the warm glass. I lifted my glass again, inhaled the scent of cinnamon and wine, and let a sense of peace fill me. This Christmas was not a repetition of the past. It was the start of a new tradition I had chosen for myself. What do you think of my story? If you've ever felt left behind in your own family, you might understand that sometimes what we need isn't blood ties, but people who listen, who understand, and who value us for who we truly are. I don't tell this story to blame or to complain. I tell it so anyone who has felt alone will know you are not wrong to protect your dignity. Family is not only where we are born, it can also be where we choose friends, companions, people who make us feel like ourselves. If this story touched something inside you, please leave your thoughts. I want to hear your perspective, whether you empathize, want to share, or see it differently. Every story has many sides, and your comments help complete the picture. And if you enjoy real-life stories about family, hurt, and how we rise again, don't forget to follow the channel. There are many more stories I'll share, slices of life that help us understand the value of love and resilience. See you in the next story.